Today we're going to continue our look at Atlantic revolutions. Just to put it in perspective, the time period we're talking about is the late 1700s through maybe the mid 1800s. And this was a time when Enlightenment ideas like representative government, personal freedoms started sweeping throughout the Atlantic world, meaning both Europe and, of course, the Americas. We left off with a Haitian Revolution. And again, what I want you to remember about the Haitian Revolution is it's the most radical because it took the lowest rung of societies, really the slaves, and it put them at the upper echelon. It put them in power, in charge. We talked about Toussaint Louverture being the first, although unfortunately for Toussaint, he ended up being captured by the French. But Dessalines, who followed him, would continue the process of making Haiti free and independent. Mexico was a little different. It really began with two Creole priests. The first was Father Miguel Hidalgo. And Father Hidalgo rang the church bells in Dolores, Mexico, and as the people gathered, mostly mestizos and Indians, he basically said, we need to overthrow this corrupt Spanish system. It would begin the Mexican Revolution. Unfortunately, for Father Hidalgo, he and his men weren't trained to defeat a combined Creole-Spanish army, and as they marched on Mexico City, they were defeated. Father Hidalgo was killed. It was left to another priest, Father Jose Morales, who ended continuing the revolution, and eventually a Creole general by the name of Augustin de Iturbide was sent to put it down, but he decided he was going to join the rebellion and overthrow the Spanish. He kind of made a deal, and the two groups, mostly mestizos and Indians and the Creoles, would drive the Spanish out. Now, Iturbide, of course, wanted all power to himself, and at first he got that. He was declared Emperor of Mexico. But after a couple years, the people of Mexico realized they didn't want a monarchy. They got rid of Iturbide, and they would create the Mexican Republic, where they would choose their rulers. A little bit similar to the United States, which was also a republic, a form of government where people choose their rulers. In South America, the liberation of South America was led by really two great Creoles. The first one is known as the Liberator. His name is Simon Bolivar. And Simon was a wealthy Creole and a general. In fact, a lot of people compare him to George Washington. He's the George Washington of Latin America. Why is he George Washington? Well, he was rich. He was wealthy. He was a Creole. He was a general. And he really could have been king, like Washington, but turned it down and created a republic and really stepped aside at the end, after serving, of course, like Washington. Anyway, Simon Bolivar began a rebellion. He united various groups to create what he would call Grand Colombia. Colombia was basically Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and even what today is Panama. He would drive out the Spanish, and he would end up pursuing them down into Peru. Now you got to understand the Spanish don't want to leave Peru because it's rich in silver. It would take Bolivar's army as well as Jose de San Martin, who led the rebellion in what was called Rio de la Plata, or La Plata as we say in St. Mary's. And he ends up liberating what today is Argentina, helping to liberate Chile, and meets up with Bolivar's army and liberates what today is Peru and Bolivia. In fact, Bolivia is named after Simon Bolivar. Unlike Bolivar, San Martin decides he doesn't want to be leader of a country. He actually leaves South America altogether and becomes like a mercenary officer, serving a variety of governments in Europe and even, I think, in the Middle East. Now, we said that Haiti was the most radical revolution. Well, what was the least radical, the most conservative? And that would be Brazil. Now, Brazil's always different because unlike the other countries we're talking about, Brazil is Portuguese. And during the time that Napoleon invaded Spain and Portugal, the royal family of Portugal fled to Brazil. And there they operated their vast empire that stretched throughout Africa and Asia. So Rio de Janeiro became like the center of the Brazilian empire. So after the Congress of Vienna, when there was a call for legitimacy and kings should return to their throne, the king of Portugal, Dom João, left back to Lisbon to rule his empire. And the Brazilians were like, man, we kind of like being the center of the Brazil or the Portuguese empire. So they convinced his son, Dom Pedro, to stay. And they said, if you stay, we can make you our king and we'll declare independence. So Pedro became Dom Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil. So what changed in Brazil? And the answer is, well, they did get their independence, but not much changed. If you were rich prior to independence, you're still rich. And if you were slave prior to independence, you were still slave. So really the landowners still held power, and they had a monarchy that was based in Brazil as opposed to a monarchy that was based in Portugal. Alright, so now we get to talk about two things I really like. How did Germany and Italy become countries? You know, prior to this, they were just in different states. Yeah, there were Germans around or Italians, but they weren't united. So a lot of it had to do with Napoleon's invasion. He swallowed up each of these German states. The most powerful German state, of course, was Prussia, a state we talked about several times. After Napoleon was defeated, the Congress of Vienna wanted a balance of power, meaning they didn't want to see a really strong France. So they began kind of loosely uniting these German states, which actually is going to create an imbalance of power because Germany, as we know in World War I and II, becomes super strong. But we're not there yet. And it's really going to take the efforts of a great leader who wasn't even a king. He was a chancellor, which means he's kind of like a prime minister. And his name was Otto von Bismarck. He was a Prussian Junker, as they called it back in the day, or a noble. And all he wanted to do was serve his king, Kaiser Wilhelm, or William, and make him strong. So what Bismarck followed was Realpolitik, which basically means realism, meaning he's going to do what it takes to forge a united country. And what he wanted was to see the Hohenzollerns, which is the Prussian royal family, in power of all German states. So he would fight 3 wars to unify Germany. And here's kind of the cool thing about Bismarck. He'd quit while he was ahead, which is pretty rare for most people who are successful. Anyway, the first war was with Denmark. And he actually sided with the other big German power, Austria, to take back Schleswig and Holstein, which are 2 German states in the northern territories next to Denmark. And Denmark was defeated easily. Then he started feuding with Austria because he knew there could only really be one powerful German state. And they fought the 6 Weeks' War, where the Prussians destroyed the Austrians' power. But the big war that he had to fight was the Franco-Prussian War. France is the power. They're newly resurgent under Napoleon III, Napoleon I's nephew, and the Second French Empire. So the cool thing is, he gets Napoleon III to admit that he wants power over some German states. And then he turns to the other German states and says, look, France wants power over you because we're weak, because we're divided. If we ever united, nobody would ever think about taking over German states. So in the Franco-Prussian War, the Prussians crush the French. In fact, Napoleon III is captured. France is humiliated. Prussian troops go to Paris. And in Paris, at the Palace of Versailles, they hold a meeting of the German states, and it was decided to create a German empire, or as they called it, the Second German Reich. And in this German Reich, Kaiser Wilhelm is going to be king of all of Germany, and Bismarck is going to become the Chancellor. He's nicknamed the Iron Chancellor because he's so strong. And this is going to kind of grate on the French. So for the next, 40 years, they're going to talk about revenge. And it's really going to be one of the leading causes of World War I, the French wanting to get revenge on the Germans. So Bismarck at first tries to unite the Germans by crushing all Catholics. If you remember the Protestant Reformation, Northern Germany, like Bismarck, is Lutheran, Southern Germany is Catholic. But the people turn against this, and he's got to end up backing off the Catholics and allowing religious freedom. Then he tries to crush the socialists, who are the rising working class. But in the end, he sees this doesn't work either. But Bismarck's smart. What he decides to do is what he calls steal their thunder. He starts passing many of the reforms that they want, like a shorter work week or workers' compensation. And this kind of leads people to say, well, why do we need the socialists if we already have what they're asking for? So Bismarck was kind of a crafty diplomat. As I mentioned, he ended the French Empire, which set the stage for World War I because he kind of humiliates them. One last thing, when William I dies, his son William II takes over, and this Kaiser, this king, begins building up the army, especially the navy, and that's going to bring them into conflict with Great Britain. See, Bismarck had worked to kind of separate Britain from France and create more of a balance of power that didn't threaten France. Like I said, he quit when he was ahead. But Wilhelm II is really going to lead Germany into World War I. Italy gets unified under Giuseppe Mazzini, who starts the Young Italy movement. These were mostly young people who were tired of Italy being divided and taken advantage of by foreign powers. They called this Risorgimento, which means resurgence, kind of like the resurgence of Italian nationalism. But the man who really gets it going is Count Cavour. He is the prime minister for the King of Sardinia. Sardinia is that island you see, the big one, in light green. And he wants to make his king, Victor Emmanuel, the king of all of Italy. So much like Bismarck wanted to make Wilhelm I the king of Germany, Cavour wanted to make Victor Emmanuel the king of Italy. He's aided by a man named Giuseppe Garibaldi, who had a group called the Red Shirts. And that area in blue there, the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, Garibaldi liberated. But instead of becoming leader of this area in blue, he ends up uniting it with Cavour's part. Garibaldi is known as the Great Liberator. In fact, if you go to New York City, there's Garibaldi Square. All over the world, Garibaldi would travel talking about individual rights and freedoms. So he was a true Democrat or liberator. There's huge differences, though, between that area in blue and the rest of Italy. In fact, if you think of Italian food in America, you're probably thinking of food from that area in blue, because it's agricultural and poor, and the vast majority of Italian immigrants came from that area, whereas the other area is more meat and cheeses, and it's more industrial and wealthy. Now, a lot of people in Italy wanted anarchy, which basically means no government, and a lot of anarchists would leave Italy because they would be suppressed. In fact, you might have heard of the Sacco-Vanzetti trials in Boston in American history. These were two Italian anarchists that robbed a bank and killed a police officer and were executed. So one of the big problems with Italy is emigration. So much of Italy's population left for Canada, the United States, Argentina, Brazil. So if you look at, like for instance, America or Argentina, they have a very high number of immigrants. I'm going to stop right there.